And Mr. Miliband, thanks so much for joining us. Of course, we will get to that IRC list, but we need to really speak about Ukraine. Ukraine is, of course, on your list. And yet what we've seen go on there in the last few weeks certainly really looks to catastrophic consequences, and not just for Ukraine. Obviously, all of Europe at risk. I mean, how can Ukraine possibly cope with what is going on now?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that are very significant about the recent developments in Ukraine that you've been covering. First of all, the pummeling of the civilian infrastructure speaks to a wider trend in global affairs. Conflict is increasingly focused on hitting civilians rather than hitting soldiers. And the majority of victims in war are now civilians. That speaks to the increasingly urban nature of warfare, but also to the tactics that are being used by various parties to conflict. In this case, the Russian military strategy does seem to be to hit the civilian population and try to exert pain that way, having been pushed back on the battlefield. I think it is worth pointing out that the last figures I saw are that 80–90% of the rockets and missiles that are coming into Ukraine are being intercepted. But that still leaves the civilian population extremely vulnerable, both to the direct hit, and then secondly, obviously to the consequences in a situation where there's -5, -10 degrees centigrade. The hit to the power sector is very dangerous. That leads to the second point, which is that, as you hinted, this is a regional crisis, a global crisis, not just a Ukraine crisis. 7 million refugees already crossed the borders into Europe. Europe handling that with real determination. But obviously there's a fear that if the Russian bombardment is successful, there'll be many more refugees, creating more pressure inside Europe.
And when we talk about that pressure, how worried are you that that might actually destabilize European unity, as you know, already a controversial issue?
Well, I'm actually struck that 2022 was the year when Europe found its unity on core values, core principles, and core actions. The weekend after the 24th of February invasion, it was a Thursday, the weekend after the European Union came together, it made startling pledges, really. 3 years commitment to every refugee being housed, having access to work, kids going to school. And also there's obviously on the military side a very strong European response. I think the threat is so clear and so singular that actually around the Ukraine issue, there's a lot of unity. I think the danger for Europe is that the disunity finds its place in other areas. But I think 2022 was a year of stronger European unity rather than disunity.
And, you know, the world's attention and eyes are on Ukraine right now. And before we move on to what is, you know, unfortunately a fairly grim list that IRC has put out, if you were at the table right now, what would you be telling leaders about how to get Russia and Ukraine to more of a point of negotiation? Because right now we seem so far from that.
Well, I think that the first point is that these are not parties that are equivalent. I mean, one party has invaded another country in complete contravention of international law. And so I obviously lead a humanitarian organization. I'm afraid the core front is on the military side, and there is a lot to play for still. There's a lot to play through. I think that 10 months into the war, it's very hard to see the Russians winning, but that's not the same as saying that there's a quick route to a defeat and to, therefore, some kind of settlement. I think the Ukrainians have held up in an extraordinary fashion, but that doesn't mean that there's a quick end, because the decision-making structure in Moscow doesn't give vent to public opinion. It doesn't allow the mothers of the Russian soldiers who've been killed on the battlefield to have their voices heard. And so you've got the singularity of decision-making inside the Kremlin really as the only decision maker in this when it comes to the terms on which Russia is willing to come to terms with the failure of its invasion.
Likely, unfortunately, a grim but realistic assessment you've given there. I do want to move to that IRC list, and it makes for grim reading. And I know that's not what you want out of this. You want action. You want people to be hopeful. And yet, how much do you have to guard against donor fatigue here? I will note a lot of the countries that we see on the list this year were on the list in prior years and, quite frankly, for decades.
Well, let's explain to your viewers, this unique watch list, this emergency watch list, is drawn from 67 different data sources. So there's a real evidence basis for the prediction about which countries are going to suffer greatest humanitarian need in 2023. 20 countries on the watch list. Those 20 countries account for 90% of the global humanitarian need. In total, the UN says 340 million people in humanitarian need. 90% of them live in just these 20 countries. The core drivers of humanitarian need are conflict, Ukraine being a prime example. They're the climate crisis, and they're the economic shockwaves, including from Ukraine, but also post-COVID. Now, you rightly refer to the danger of donor fatigue, and there are two stories here that are important. There are donors, notably in Europe, who are not stepping up to the global needs. They're focused on Ukraine. The Gulf has done very well out of the rise in energy prices. They're not stepping up. But I do have to call out the US government. That's the other side of the story. The US government has made really significant progress in 2022 in recognizing the global consequences of the Ukraine war. And it's for that reason that they have boosted their international aid, especially to East Africa, where food prices have grown so significantly as a result of the Ukraine war and the blockage on grain exports. A country like Somalia, which is top of our list, 90% of its wheat comes from Ukraine. So you can see the danger. And across the 20 countries of the watch list, there's a 40% rise in food price inflation, in large part because of the Ukraine conflict. So those global consequences are being recognized by the US. They're not being recognized by other donors. And the purpose of our watch list is not just to sound a warning. It is indeed to be the call to action that you refer to. And we think there are things that can be done, and we're calling on the global community to follow where the US has led.
Right, but Somalia is a good case in point. No matter the American involvement, and I take it that America perhaps has re-engaged there, they have been engaged on and off for 3 decades. The situation in Somalia continues to be really an existential threat to the people there and to the stability of the whole region. What's changed and what can change in 2023, even if donors step up?
That's a very powerful point. So I quite understand why you're asking it. Just for background, 15 of the 20 countries on the International Rescue Committee's emergency watch list have been there for at least 5 years. So you're making an important point about protracted conflict. Now, in the case of Somalia, it's got a new factor on the scene, which is the climate crisis. We haven't seen the kind of drought effect that is hitting Somalia now. You weren't seeing that 30 years ago. I was in eastern Ethiopia towards the border with Somalia just last month, and you can see the consequences across the East African region of successive missed rainfalls. That's a new factor in the equation, and it calls for a strengthening of the guardrails against disaster. Now, those guardrails are the form of climate resilient agriculture. They're the form of international aid that can help people who are on the brink of famine. But then there are the deeper, more fundamental questions of governance, which I think you might be referring to, governance and conflict. And that indeed is a very long-term problem. What we're seeing in the places that the IRC works is that the tools of diplomacy to regulate relations between nations are not adequate for conflict within nations. And that's where our greatest concern is. 80% of the humanitarian need on our watch list is driven by civil war. And that's where we need new tools of diplomacy to get upstream and solve some of these problems.
And yet, as you provocatively point out, we are having trouble governing our own nations in very strong and long-standing democracies. You know, as I said, provocatively, you pointed out that a framing of democracy versus autocracy does not speak to international affairs in a way that is optimal. Please explain that in terms of what that means. You say, nor does it speak for the concerns outside of the West and the mistakes of democratic countries. The issue here, though, is everything that you've signposted from IRC. How do you get from, the data that you provide to action when, even as you rightly point out, we are in a crisis here of governance, not just nationally, but internationally?
Yes, there is a fight for the renewal and sustenance of democracy. Less than 20% of the global population live in what Freedom House, the most respected think tank on this issue, calls a fully free and democratic system. So there is democratic recession. The trouble is that the framing of democracy versus autocracy is really for within nation states. It's not a global framing. What I argue is that the global issue is one of impunity versus accountability. Impunity is the exercise of power without accountability. And as you know, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So on the one hand, you have the rise of impunity. On the other hand, you have accountability checks on the abuse of power. That starts with transparency. It involves the legal system. It involves countervailing power against impunity. And I think as we think about international affairs in the 2020s, we shouldn't be thinking about it as democracy versus autocracy in the international realm. We should think about it as impunity versus the rule of law. That's why the Ukraine crisis is so significant. That's why the denial of aid in parts of Ethiopia or Somalia is so significant, contrary to the rule of law. It's the rule of law that we have to defend at the international level. We don't need new laws. They were written in the UN Charter and associated documents 75 years ago. They need to be defended. And that's what I think, that's the basic framing that I think can help at the international level.